Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. In today's special episode, we sat down with Gregory Copley, president of the International Strategic Studies Association. He touches on the COP26 climate summit, the mixed messages coming out of China, and what it means going forward. Gregory, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you back on the show.
Wonderful to be back with you, Tiffany.
So the COP26 climate summit has been making headlines recently, and one of the countries missing is China. And President Biden even called out China, saying they walked away from an opportunity to help. And so just recently, the U.S. and China released a joint statement vowing to cut down on emissions. But what's your take on that whole situation?
Well, it's a very interesting mix because the reality is that General Secretary Xi Jinping really could not leave the People's Republic of China at this time. He is literally fighting for his political life and perhaps his real life too. So he wants to make sure that he's got things under control domestically so that he can be re-elected at the 20th Party Congress coming up next year in October. But he has many enemies at home. There are things which are not going according to plan, particularly with the economy. So Xi Jinping has to stay at home for fear of losing his job. So that's the really underlying feature of why he didn't attend the Glasgow summit. But the reality is that he did not want also to go to Glasgow because it would have called out the People's Republic of China on their coal issues and their general pollution issues. Certainly, Beijing has improved some of its ecological operations, but the reality is that it's still the world's greatest polluter. And so it suited both Xi Jinping and President Joe Biden of the United States to issue this post-summit declaration of their own, which gets them back on track. And basically, it's President Biden giving Xi Jinping another pass in this regard. The summit itself may be meaningless because it will not stop China in its necessary commitment to coal, but it does give them some breathing space. And in any event, the People's Republic of China has now reached peak coal. It's now exploiting the last remnants of its reserves, so its coal production will continue to decline going forward.
And so, knowing China's history, how seriously should we take the joint statement? And how likely is Beijing to follow through and really crack down on emissions?
This is part of its lawfare, its illegal warfare type of approach to things. You agree to declarations and treaties and the like, but they mean absolutely nothing in strategic terms, but they do bind your partners. For the same reason, Xi Jinping has been pushing the United States to talk about arms limitation treaties, knowing that this would bind the United States. And President Biden has really given in on every issue so far to Beijing, even when his national security advisor met with a Politburo member in Europe recently, and the U.S. agreed that mainland China was not an enemy, but rather just an extreme competitor. I mean, how many more dialectical spins are we going to hear out of Washington on this to give Beijing a pass?
So speaking of coal, at the summit, 23 countries joined 167 other countries in agreeing not to start new coal production. But China wasn't one of them. And in China right now, there's the energy crisis happening with a coal shortage. So how do you see that playing in with China not promising to cut down on coal? Can they follow through on their climate promises?
The U.S. under the Trump administration out of the Paris Accords, that the U.S. actually made substantial improvements in its ecological performance. So that happened without any of this the folderol of international treaties on climate, the hand-wringing and the like. Australia as well made substantial progress outside of the Paris Accords. So the reality is that we don't need the accords or these international treaties to achieve the objectives. And in any event, as far as Beijing is concerned, treaties are there to bind the wrists of their opponents and to give them a free run. And that's what's happening today. The People's Republic of China will announce over the coming years that it has reduced coal production. That's not going to be because it's virtuously and deliberately done so. It's because they're running out of coal.
So, with the whole situation in China right now, the air pollution has also gotten so bad that it's made its way to Siberia, to the point that it's increased cancer rates there. So, it seems like it's not just a China issue, but really a global one.
Well, that's true. The People's Republic of China has moved, if you like, a lot of its coal-fired operations, energy operations, out closer to the borders, so that the pollution, in fact, is largely outside of mainland China. This is their way of reducing the smog and the like in Chinese cities. They move the energy production out to the borders and then transmit the energy back into the cities. The reality is that the People's Republic of China's one great technological leap forward has been in improving the efficiency of the transmission of electricity once it's generated, so they can afford to have that production down closer to the Thai border or the Siberian border and the like, and the effects of that coal production go to that region and not back into Beijing or Shanghai and Guangzhou and the like.
And it seems inside China, there's kind of a conflict of interest because a lot of officials won't release how bad the air quality is because they have to keep up with production promises. And so the ones who suffer are A, the Chinese people, and B, the people of the world. So given that context, how would it be possible for China to actually take the stand on climate, which they do publicly?
When you look at Chinese statistics, or the People's Republic of China statistics, the reality is that not one of them relates to reality. And we saw the Soviets doing the same thing during the 70 or so years of Soviet occupation of the Russian Empire. They would say, or release whatever figures made things look good to show progress in the 5-year plan and so on and so on. In the People's Republic of China, they've taken this Soviet methodology to extremes. So nothing is plausible in what the PRC says. It will announce improvements in smog controls or in climate issues and everything else. The reality is that the PRC is disguising the reality at every opportunity. We know that the People's Republic of China has been in economic decline since about 2015, that they've run out of capital to fund the Belt and Road Initiative, that they can't raise money from or repayments from the loans they've made on the Belt and Road Initiative, and so on. But yet we consistently see reports of economic growth, and the World Bank and the IMF and Wall Street more or less have no option but to believe that there's some truth in these figures, even though they know in their hearts that there is no truth in these figures. So this is critical, and it's going to be critical for Xi Jinping over the coming 12 months, because he has to keep up the fiction that the People's Republic of China is a growing economic and strategic power, when in fact it's in serious and terminal decline, and he is managing the implosion of that economy in such a way that he can stop the owners of private capital, particularly the entrepreneurs of the People's Republic of China, from thinking that they can rebel against the Communist Party. Right now, it's about ensuring, if you like, on the one hand, this mystical belief that the Communist Party is in charge of a growing strategic power, while on the other, it's about controlling the movements and the lives of people in such a minute fashion that any movement away from loyalty to the party means that you will stop eating, you will not be able to get on a bus, that you will not even be allowed to leave your apartment. The reality is that we are seeing a return dramatically to the Maoist period, particularly of the 1950s, when we saw the Great Famine, the massive national starvation. We're seeing this on the horizon, and people are already beginning to suffer, particularly after a year or two of severe natural disasters and the collapse of this communist infrastructure, that particularly the dams and so on, which were designed to conquer nature. And this was the old Stalinist approach and the Maoist approach, and it's failed comprehensively.
So, given all of that, what will it take for China to actually do something to help the environment?
It would take the collapse of the Communist Party of China for a start, and to see the restoration, if you like, of a truly natural society, such as we've seen, in fact, with Taiwan. I mean, we know it's feasible. It would be very, very difficult at this stage without having some chaos. The collapse of any great power organization, such as the Communist Party of China, means that you would have a period of reconstruction. But that's not impossible. It's been done before in China historically, even during the communist period when we fluctuated from centralized control to warlordism in the regions and the like. And basically, what I see is with the collapse of the Communist Party, you would see the rise of regional governments within the overall Chinese geopolitical entity, so that the return to normalcy and, if you like, the application of laws and practices which benefit society, that'll be in the hands of the local people, and it'll happen. But the question is, how long will it take for the Communist Party to collapse or to acknowledge that they need to change their structure fundamentally if they want China as a strategic entity to remain viable?
So, you brought up China's kind of Stalinistic approach of conquering nature, but also this year especially, there's been a whole slew of natural disasters from flooding to droughts. And so it seems like this approach hasn't been working very well. But even then, there's been a lack of transparency, with people saying like their loved ones never came back after the flooding in the subway, for instance, and no one told them anything. So going forward, how long can this last before it starts to fall apart?
Well, it's as we see, it's taking an increasing amount of repression and threats against society to keep the people under control. You mentioned the natural disasters, and we have that fundamental statistic which determines China's future, which is they have about 20% of the world's population and 7% of the world's water, and that water is mostly polluted. As the old English poem goes, water, water everywhere, and nary a drop to drink. And that's the situation we're seeing. So we can't see an improvement in food production in China, and what food production there is constantly being compromised by tainted water, by natural disasters and the like, which are triggering a widespread unhappiness. And what we see is that the People's Republic of China has turned from a period of great optimism several years ago to one of great gloominess and depression today, and that is only going to increase. And the constraints on freedom of movement are already in place, and they're getting worse. The movement of capital is being restricted. It's been made abundantly clear that any economic success, which any PRC citizen has, is really on loan from the Communist Party, and that they can and will take it back as they need to do so. And the US investment community should be equally aware, because the several trillions of dollars wiped from the Shanghai and Beijing stock exchanges in recent months is largely being funded by the pension funds of working Americans.
And so it seems like change isn't going to happen inside communist China. So is there anything, say, the US and the international community can do to try and help?
Yes, I think we need to take real stock of the climate situation, recognize that historically we have seen great fluctuations in climate patterns through natural causes and in fact cycles of nature which cannot be impacted largely by humans. Yes, there are things we can do to improve our environment, absolutely, and that's got to be a priority, and that can be a priority without being a massive cost, but either economically or strategically. What we have seen already is that Beijing is trying to limit the return to normal economic life and growth in the outside world, particularly in the United States, but throughout the West. They want to limit the growth and, if you like, prosperity of those countries by tying them to fictional demands for climate action, which Beijing, the great offender in pollution, is not going to follow. So we see the West wringing its hands over climate when it should be saying we need to have a practical approach to how we manage natural or man-made changes in climate and pollution and environmental concerns without destroying our economies, encouraging pollution reduction in the coal mining industry, because coal is one of the great resources of the world. It just has to be managed in increasingly better ways to ensure that less damage is done to the environment. And yes, of course, move to all other forms of energy production where feasible, but it has to be driven by realities of the market, not by the dictates of college students.
And so also at the climate summit, there were calls to cut down on deforestation. And right now, China is a great offender in that regard. So with key players missing at these types of summits like China, how much change can come about from them?
Well, there's no question that there's been a great awareness of the need to preserve forest areas around the world, in such areas as the Amazon basin and the like, but not just there, but throughout even Australia particularly, where they've started to reverse a lot of the deforestation of the early pioneering agricultural days. But from the Amazon, that's driven by the need to fulfill market demands by Beijing for minerals, for food production, for timber and the like. Why are we seeing the PRC exporting timber, for example, which is originally imported from the great forests of the world? So the PRC is the great contributor to deforestation worldwide, not just deforestation of China itself.
And so what would be some ways to cut down on that? Because it seems if China keeps on this trajectory, the goals of the summit to cut down on deforestation aren't going to be realized.
That's correct. And one of the natural market corrections that we're going to see in this regard is the collapse of the mainland Chinese economy under the Communist Party. They've run out of money. Their hard currency foreign exchange reserves are dwindling to an alarming extent. This food dependency is going to be increasingly the driving force in where money goes from the People's Republic of China. Although we are seeing that there's a Maoist pattern in this, that they will still divert as much money as possible to the instruments of repression, particularly the internal security forces, plus the People's Liberation Army, which will continue to be the showcase of pompous strength that they can demonstrate to the world and to the Chinese people. But the reality is that the amount of money going to food for the Chinese population is going to decrease, and it is going to cause even greater hardship than is already visible when it's already getting unhealthy.
And so going forward, how do you see this as playing out?
Well, it'd be nice to come up with a note of optimism. The People's Republic of China is beginning to see that the Communist Party is less than omnipotent. It is not taking the People's Republic of China to become the world's great hegemon by 2049, as Xi Jinping declared it would when he said that the PRC was at war in 2018. He said that the PRC was at war with the United States and would see Beijing as the global hegemon by 2049 after the new 30 Years' War. The reality is that that's not going to happen, and that is the good news for the Chinese people, provided they can find a way to exist during this tragic implosion that we're going to see, and we are starting to see, in the mainland Chinese economy.
Well, Gregory, thank you so much for joining us today. Great to have you on the show.
Thank you very much for having me. Great to be with you.
And for those just tuning in, that was today's special episode with Gregory Copley, president of the International Strategic Studies Association. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.